In 1700, India accounted for nearly a quarter of the world's economy. It was the heart of global trade: gold, silk, spices. Fine cottons and jewels moved across continents. Its cities were vibrant, shining with commerce and craftsmanship. Bengal alone was richer than the entire United Kingdom. But by 1947, India's share of the global economy had fallen below 4%. So what happened? That difference didn't vanish. It was taken. Not just by war, but through ledgers, taxes, and trade laws. For 2 centuries, the British Empire built one of the most efficient systems of exploitation in human history. They didn't just govern India. They turned it into money. A civilization that once exported luxury goods from Rome to China was transformed into a cheap supplier of raw materials for Britain, and they did it quietly, through accounting. This is not a story of nationalism or revenge. This is a story about mathematics. One of the richest societies in the world became poorer, not by war, but by financial design. At the beginning of the 1600s, India was ruled by the Mughal Empire, a population of around 150 million, a quarter of the world. A civilization full of agriculture, irrigation, and trading ports. Indian textiles were so valuable that Europeans would travel for months just to bring back a small quantity of cotton. Black pepper, indigo, silk flowed from the ports of Surat and Calcutta to the world. India had trade surpluses with almost everyone. Gold and silver poured in. Across the sea, a small island nation was rising. Britain. Ambitious, organized, and focused on something new. Joint stock companies. In 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted London merchants a charter, the English East India Company. It was not a state, but it would become one. It had shareholders, a board of directors, and soon an army. At first they were just ordinary merchants. Portugal, the Netherlands, and France were already in India. But while others sought partnerships, the English sought monopoly. Their weapons, no, their finances. Ships were financed through bonds. Lloyd's insurance came into play, and trade expanded via London's credit network. The company quickly realized the real profit was not in trade, but in taxes. In 1757, everything changed. The Battle of Plassey, to a small conflict in Bengal, became a turning point in world history. With around 1,000 British soldiers and a few allies, the East India Company defeated the Bengal Nawab. But the true victory came afterward. The company appointed a puppet ruler who granted them the right to collect Bengal's taxes. This was the birth of corporate colonialism. Within a decade, tens of millions of pounds flowed from Bengal every year. Such a vast transfer of wealth that inflation, famine, and financial collapse occurred. London prospered, Calcutta starved. Profits for the British Parliament were enormous. Shares of the East India Company skyrocketed. London investors grew rich from taxes without ever setting foot in India. Yet those same taxes were collected from farmers who could barely find food. The company became a private empire with its own currency, army, and courts. While managers in London sat in polished offices, agents in India enforced forced labor, monopolized trade, and crushed local industries under the guise of a free market. This was not mere plunder. It was a systematic transfer. In 1770, the Bengal famine, one of the worst disasters in recorded history, killed around 10 million people. Yet the company's revenues continued to rise. They continued collecting taxes, exporting grain. It was a good year for London investors. British economists justified it all as civilization. India was backward. Britain was modernizing it. building railways, introducing law and English education. But all these improvements were designed to extract wealth. Railways were meant to connect farmers to ports, schools to train bureaucrats, courts to enforce debts. Even the railways were financed in a way that guaranteed profits for Britain, 5% annual return funded by Indian taxes. If profits fell short, the difference was paid by Indians. The risk was Indian, the reward British. The system was so efficient it was called the drain of wealth. Dadabhai Naoroji, in his 1901 books Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, described it as India's bleeding. Resources, labor, and capital flowed to Britain with no return. By the late 19th century, India was losing hundreds of millions of pounds annually, financing Britain's industrial revolution and wars. Between 1765 and 1938, Britain extracted the modern equivalent of $45 trillion from India. The number is almost unimaginable, but its impact was everywhere. India's vibrant artisan and merchant economy had transformed into a peasant population trapped in debt. The lights of Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool shone with India's raw materials. Weaving looms in India were silent. Textiles were not the only loss. Shipbuilding, ironwork, and carpentry also declined. Forests were cut down. For railway sleepers, and farmers were forced to grow cash crops like indigo and opium. When drought struck, the results were catastrophic. Between 1876 and 1902, over 20 million people died. During the same years, millions of tons of grain were exported to Britain. Grain that could have fed the dead was sent for revenue. The most insidious part of the system was that India's own money was used to maintain the empire. Indian soldiers fought on every front, their salaries deducted from Indian taxes. British infrastructure was financed with Indian capital. In 1947, India became independent, but it inherited not only poverty but a system of dependency. Centuries of exploitation had destroyed local industries, depleted capital reserves, and reduced literacy to below 2%. But the world was not free. The global financial system was built on the principles pioneered by the empire: balance of trade, capital flows, and invisible exploitation. Today, not much has changed. Developing countries export raw materials, import finished goods, and try to pay off debt. The only difference is the tools are now digital and the names have changed, but the logic remains the same. Yet India endured. Despite 2 centuries of exploitation, famine, and partition, it rebuilt itself. It nationalized industries, reformed its currency, and began reclaiming what it had lost, not through revenge, but through reinvention. Today, India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, but the traces of the past remain. The wealth gap between the global north and south is the old trade routes transformed into capital flows, and every generation must ask, if a system rewards exploitation over creation, can it truly be free? Because what Britain proved, empires do not fall, they adapt. What India proved, even the most exploited nations can rise again. But recovery takes time. Exploitation is immediate. The British did not conquer India only with armies. They conquered it with accountants. And the ledger opened in 1757 is still balanced, only under different names with new tools. History does not repeat itself, but the balance sheet still adjusts.